Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Truth Noir. As always on this show, we're going to be talking about weird stuff, and today is no different. I've got an old friend of the show and a really smart dude to boot. Whenever I have him on, we just kind of go freeform, so I have no idea what the show is going to be about. But it's always good to have him on. I want to introduce Mr. Atelston Fitzgerald Holder I.
Thank you for having me out.
Welcome, sir. And yeah, man, thanks for coming down and rapping with me today.
Thank you. I'm flabbergasted beyond comprehension. I'm excited, actually.
Well, yeah. To start, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience at home a little bit about yourself and.
Well, I'm a research scientist / entertainer. I studied a lot of different. I study a lot of different areas, academic areas, primarily cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and interdisciplinary areas. Basically, all that means is taking multiple disciplines into consideration. It may be a situation where mutually exclusive disciplines converge, or where disciplines overlap on a deep level. Like you might find certain areas interdisciplinary where physics meets linguistics when it comes to areas of language and speech and tonality. So
interesting.
Yeah,
man. So I don't know where to start. What do you think about subliminal messages in entertainment media?
Oh wow, that's a that's a big subject. I mean, subliminal influences or subliminal messages, information that bypasses below the psychological threshold of conscious perception. So you have the conscious mind, you have the subconscious, and you have the preconscious or universal unconsciousness. Now, this area below the conscious mind is where we get into areas like psychodynamics, which is sort of like the interrelationship or the interrelation between the conscious, the unconscious, emotions, personality, and motivation, goals, and drive. But subliminals, in and of itself, you have subliminal, you have supraliminal, you have hyperliminal, you have hypnosis, and you have neuro-linguistic programming.
Sure.
NLP. And you have cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is like a subset or a branch of NLP, equivalent to psychoanalytics being a branch or a subset of psychodynamics. So I could break them down if you like. So subliminal, subliminal is basically information that bypasses below the psychological threshold of conscious perception. Supraliminal is information that bypasses above the physiological threshold of conscious perception. Hyperliminal is a mixture of both, information that bypasses below the psychological threshold and above the physiological threshold. And then we have hypnosis. Hypnosis is basically, our brain oscillates in different brain waves. You have the alpha, beta, delta, and theta. Hypnosis is basically when the brain transition from the alpha or the beta to the theta or the deep delta state, where all actions become involuntary, making the subject susceptible to outside influence.
Yeah, suggestion and all of that.
Suggestion, right. And then neuro-linguistic programming, often used interchangeably with natural language processing, because they both consist of the same abbreviation, NLP. Mm-hmm. But natural language processing is like it's a multidisciplinary discipline. It's a correlation between computer language and linguistic models. Now, neuro-linguistic programming basically is a correlation between neurological processes, linguistic models, behavioral patterns, and the human experience. So what do they all share in common? They are all capable, they are all a form of subliminal influence. Now, subliminal in and of itself is information that bypasses below the psychological threshold. So you may look at, let's say a prime example is a FedEx logo. But FedEx logo have like a sacred geometric shape ingrained in the logo. No, your conscious mind is incapable of seeing that. Right.
Yeah, so there's a logo that you're looking at, mm-hmm. and you know that it says FedEx.
Right.
But then there's also symbolism hidden in that,
right.
which communicates on a deeper level, and any kind of good logo will do that.
Yes.
It'll be recognizable to your conscious mind, but then it will also suggest to your subconscious what that company does, or some characteristic contained in that pictographic representation.
Yeah, but the fascinating phenomenon with subliminal influences is you're unaware of it. On a conscious level, you're unable to depict this. This is why they call it information that bypasses below the psychological. Supraliminal, now, information that bypasses above the physiological threshold, so it's detectable. A prime example of subliminal below the psychological threshold is where you can play music. You could have music, and then you could insert or ingrain a lower level of dialogue in the song where you cannot perceive it consciously, but it's on a subconscious level. You could pick up on the dialogue, you could pick up on the information, and this can program your subconscious mind, right? So subliminal, you're incapable of perceiving it. Supraliminal now is information that bypasses above the physiological threshold. So one example is a coffee shop may set the room at a very specific temperature to induce customers to do two things. The coldness is at a specific temperature to induce customers to continuously buy coffee or leave the coffee shop. Right.
Right, yeah.
Right. That's one example of supraliminal. So you are aware of the cold, but you're not aware how it's affecting you on a subconscious level. Another example of supraliminal is you go into a wine bar and there's a specific type of music, ambience music, where they studied in cognitive neuroscience that has an effect on your mind. So you go into a wine bar and this specific type of ambience music induces you to make purchase. Right, so that's subliminal.
Yeah, it's relaxing to listen to. You want to stay for a while, and I'm here for a while, I might as well have another glass of wine.
And then you have hypnosis, which is more prevalent, attributed to when the brain is induced and the person action become involuntary. This is where they get into areas like past life regression, we call it retrocognition, or memory of your incarnated past time. And neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, is one of the most fascinating subliminal influences because it's sort of an interrelationship where it takes all these mutually exclusive areas into consideration. There's a correlation between neurological processes, linguistic models, behavioral patterns, and the human experience. So what does all this mean? What this does is it takes two key areas into consideration. One is called anchor and trigger. Anchor are any reference point that stabilizes a physiological, psychological, or emotional state. And trigger are basically self-explanatory, what evokes these emotions. So a prime example is you may walk into a coffee shop, you may meet a girl, and she's wearing the perfume that your first girlfriend had.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that's a prime example of a neuro-linguistic programming from an olfactory perspective.
And then that's going to trigger memories from a past event.
And, in science, they have these jargonic, I call it verbosity term they call it auditory, optical, olfactory, tactile, and gustatory. What that means is you hear, you see, you smell, you taste, you touch.
Touch, yeah.
Right, so here's a prime example I give you, an analogy of where neuro-linguistic programming goes into effect because it affects your olfactory sensory perception. So when you ask the question about subliminals has to take a whole, it's a conglomeration of subliminal, supraliminal, hyperliminal, hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming, and also cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a whole different area. So, and then it begs much bigger philosophical questions, right? Like, the most pervasive definition of the word free will is the freedom to take action, make decisions, and govern events that's in accordance and at the discretion of one's personal motivation. But this philosophical ideology preceded centuries back, deriving from areas like existentialism, but it never took into consideration these whole contemporary
these concepts of like
Right.
you are continually being subject to neuro-linguistic programming, even like back in the day where they weren't doing it with technology, it was still through suggestion or ritual or tradition. And so at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, do you have any free will after all of this programming that you've been subjected to? Are you living your free will, or are you living someone else's free will that has will over you because they know the science of neurolinguistic programming?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a difficult. That's kind of like a existentialistic question.
I think you still do.
Yeah.
You just have to work harder for it.
Yeah. I mean, there's big question. Like one philosophical idea is determinism. Determinism postulates that the universe is acausal. Action, events, and decisions are governed by cause and effect. They could call it antecedent. Logically preceding the cause precedes the effect. But indeterminism now is a philosophical ideology that contrasts this. It posits that, not all action in the universe is acausal. Right? Acausal basically means that you can't find a correlation between cause and effect. Right? There's this perfect synchronistic alignment, but you can't find the connection.
Right.
Indeterminism postulates that not all action, events, and decisions are governed by cause and effect. Some are governed by happenstance. We could call it coincidence or synchronicity. So there's, and then you have fatalism. Fatalism is one of this. Is one of those. It has this sort of. It has a submissive outlook of reality. It postulates that our reality is subjugated to impersonal fate. So whatever your philosophy, your ideas, your ideology, your preconceived notion is irrelevant, because fatalism philosophy is reality is subjugated to a sort of impersonal fate. It's independent of any sort of subjectivity you may have in mind. This is one of those shows where you go off into all this crazy tangent.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Well, I think transdisciplinary methodology works a lot here because it helps to explain certain things that might be a little bit more difficult to grasp if you look at just by itself. Like for me, with all of the talk about like psychology and everything that we were just talking about, to me it makes it a lot easier to understand if you think about light, and that there's certain frequencies of light that are imperceptible to our eyes,
Right.
but they still exist. There is stuff that we perceive as energy or heat that is still light, but we just can't see it. We feel it instead. And so to correlate that with subliminal messaging or neurolinguistic programming, it's just a different way of looking at it, that there are many correlations to be drawn between.
Many.
Even if they're a little bit more abstract.
It is. We can see radio waves, we can see infrared, we can see microwave. Higher up the electromagnetic spectrum, we can see X-ray, we can see ultraviolet, we can see gamma radiation, and then the myriads of electromagnetic frequency that ascends above and beyond our perception.
Yeah, that we can't even measure.
Right. I mean, and then that's a prime example now, because we see where there's an imperfection, there's an inefficiency of one idea in philosophy is realism. Realism postulates that abstract ideas, concept, and knowledge are innate and independent of sensory perception. Empiricism now is a philosophy that opposes this by positing that abstract ideas, concepts, and knowledge are not just innate, but they are contingent on our sensory perception. So I think it's a fascinating phenomenon. Not just these subject in and of itself, but science overall methodology, how it goes about to process stuff.
Yeah, I was listening to an interesting story that someone was telling, and he was talking about just being on the bus and having this thought, or maybe it was a book that he was reading, and it spurred this notion in him that and this was about synthesis in argument. And he made the example of political debate. And he said, now originally, classically, debate was about synthesis, a synthesis of ideas. And so that if you have an idea and you present it and I say, no, I disagree with you, I think it should be this way, then we're going to debate that, and maybe we're going to come up with some other better idea than either of us had before, because we take the good parts about what we were saying and apply them to this new thing, like in that way that you synthesize something better. And he was talking about how very different that is from political debate today, and probably for the last century at least, where now you have debate descending into logical fallacy. Pretty much all of them that you can imagine, but mostly like these ad hominem, where you attack the person, not the idea. And so if you have two people debating and they're doing nothing but saying, no, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, no, you're an idiot, and everyone who agrees with you is an idiot, no, you're an idiot, same thing, then what is the synthesis of that? It's just this perpetuation of idiocy, and nothing gets accomplished. And I thought it was a very interesting way of looking at that, because it seems to me like different disciplines of science engage in the same sort of destructive arguments at times, when they could be working together and understanding how their disciplines correlate each other's sayings rather than just attacking.
I think most, if not all, never really. There's a few areas we could go into. We probably don't have much time. We're going to get into logic, reasoning, and evidence. Let's look specifically, let's isolate one area. Let's get into areas like evidence. What is evidence? Evidence is defined as, and this is I'll use primarily the Oxford, both British and English translation, because it's considered the principal and historical authority on language, preceding back to Anglo-Saxon time and onwards. There's different forms of evidence. We have theoretical, we have empirical, we have inferential, we have subjective, we have objective, and we have anecdotal. And the way they go about evidence is a sort of circular, right? Dictionary lexicographers' publication of words in the dictionary is sort of differs in a sort of circular reason. A theoretical basically means a collection of propositions that illustrate the principle of a subject. You hear that? Theoretical evidence. A theoretical means a collection of propositions that illustrate the principle of a subject. Then you have inferential. Inferential is based on evidence, reason, and data. And then you have observational. Observational evidence is based on, self-explanatory, based on
what you're able to see and experience and
based
touch.
On observation. But then you have all these different sorts of observational evidence. You have intersubjective observational evidence, you have intrasubjective observational evidence, and you have intersubjective observational evidence. We could probably get into, if we have time, in another episode. Then you have personal empirical evidence, you have interpersonal empirical evidence, and you have intrapersonal empirical evidence. So you have theoretical, we have inferential, we have empirical, then we have subjective evidence based, self-explanatory, based on personal experience, and we have objective evidence, which is based on sort of impersonal evidence that exists exclusively and independent of any personal views or ideology. And then we have anecdotal. What is anecdotal, which is considered at the bottom of the chains of evidence, which could be true or false or hearsay. So you have theoretical, we have inferential, we have empirical, we have subjective, we have objective, and we have anecdotal. They all kind of differ. So what is theoretical evidence? A collection of propositions that illustrates the principles of a subject. Well, then you need to get into areas like, what is a proposition?
Right.
What is a premise? What is a syllogism? Right. No, premise and proposition is a whole different subject by itself, because when you look at lexicographers' publication of the word premise, premise by definition is a previous statement or proposition in which another is inferred. So why is a premise and a proposition used interchangeably when they are mutually exclusive definition, right? And it turns out the reason for this is because one of the inefficiency of linguistic models is lexicographers' inability to decipher the ambiguous nature of language, because a premise is ambiguous and a proposition is ambiguous.
It's a big job being a lexicographer. I mean, there are so many words that have, and especially in the English language, that have come from so many different languages that you really can't be monolinguistic person. You can't be a single language speaker when you are trying to pull apart the lexicon of the English language, because there are so many words that are borrowed or straight up stolen, that sometimes we use them and the meaning is completely opposite. And so I think it's been cause for a lot of confusion over the last 1,000 years that the English language has existed in the way that it has.
You mentioned before I got into this long tangent about synthesis, which actually is a unified whole between mutually exclusive parts. Our arguments are really built, or like you hear in philosophy, the most pervasive term, they call it axiom. Axiom is, again, this sort of circular, deferring back. An axiom is basically a statement or proposition regarded as a self-evident truth. We're not even going to get into that. But my contention here is a premise is this: a previous statement or proposition in which another is inferred. A premise as a verb, because a premise is an ambiguous word. It is a noun and a verb. The verb is a subset, or the secondary meaning, the subset. Premise as a verb is a presupposition. Presupposition and supposition is not the same. Presupposition is to state or assume beforehand. And then you have proposition now as a noun is a statement or an assertion that expresses a judgment or opinion. Proposition as a verb is a proposition. Proposition is probably, we hear most pervasively, sociologically, where you hear the term, he propositioned her.
Yeah, it's like a suggestion or
But it's proposition used as a verb, because proposition as a verb is a proposition. But proposition as a noun is a statement or an assertion that expresses a judgment or opinion. A premise as a noun is a previous statement or proposition in which another is inferred. But why is a premise and proposition used interchangeably as a noun? Right? This is a defect. Misconception, misperception, misapprehension, misconstrue. Lexicographers are wrong 4 times. That's how wrong they are.
Well, yeah, and it kind of calls into question maybe even a lot of the scientific method itself, right? When you're using these words to support your statements, your theses, your conclusions, and then you look back at the definitions of these words that you've used, you find that there's sometimes not a lot of substance to them.
It's confusing. I mean, look at the hypothesis. A hypothesis is basically a supposition or a proposed explanation made on the basis of limited evidence, pending further investigation, right? And then you say an axiom is a statement or proposition regarded as a self-evident truth. So you see, but then you can't blame lexicographers, because language in and of itself, etymologically speaking, and the whole evolution of language is not based on the prescriptive aspect of it. It's more descriptive. Lexicographers collectively publish the semantical definition of a word based on how its sociological interpretation based on a collective group of people. So it's published based on how we interpret language or how we perceive it to be. So I find this to be a fascinating phenomenon. Not just the language in and of itself, but get into areas like logic, reason. Look, I'll give you a quick example. Logic is basically reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. It doesn't answer the question.
Nope.
No. Reasoning, right, is a cause, explanation, or justification for an action or event, right? Now, reasoning now, because of the inflectional morphological implication of the word ing, it alters the semantics. So the word reason was defined as a cause, explanation, or justification for an action or event. The meaning now is more modified now with the ing to a logical and sensible approach in which information is processed. Evidence is defined as the available body of facts or information underlying whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. All 4 words differ and reflect back. Logic uses reason, reason reflects back to logic, logic reflects back to evidence, evidence reflects back to proposition. When you go to premise, premise tells you proposition, you go to proposition, proposition tells you axiom.
Right, and you go back far enough and then you realize that all of these arguments are inherently flawed at their core?
Well, I won't say they're flawed. I mean, there's a level of imperfection to some degree, but you get to a point where you begin to see fallacies in everyone's argument, because I'm not even getting into the subject. I'm getting into the foundation.
Yeah,
the
just
crux
the
of it all.
definitions of the words.
What is argument? What is reason? What is deductive reason? What is inductive? What is abductive? What is reductive? What is counterfactual? How are arguments constructed? And then you begin to see flaw in everyone's argument.
Yeah.
Right. So, unfortunately, we did not have enough time to elaborate on these concepts.
Yeah, well, tell you what, man, I think we got a fair way into it.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you coming down.
And I look cute as always. Sorry,
yeah,
I have to get that in.
You are looking quite dapper, I must admit.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, man, we'll tell you what, if you want to stick around, we can do another episode, and we can either continue with this or jump onto another topic.
I think you could trust your intuition if you want to. I think we did exactly. Are we on air?
Yeah, we're still going.
Oh, why can't we just continue? Why can't we just continue?
Well, we have 2 minutes, and then that'll be the end of one episode. Yeah. We can start again.
Right here, right now?
Yep. And then we can go for another little stretch of time if you want.
Okay, if you want. Yeah.
But this one we have to wrap up real quick. So with that being said, the definitions of words are important, you guys, and a lot of times when you really look into the definitions of words that I don't know that your politicians are using, a lot of times you find that what they're saying, and this is regardless of whatever side of the aisle you're rooting for, but a lot of times it turns out to be garbage. It's just a lot of hot air swirling around and not a whole lot of substance. It's not just politicians, but it's a lot of things. All of your advertising is getting deep in your brain, telling you need to keep consuming and buying and doing all of that kind of stuff. So I want to thank you again for coming down and expounding on a lot of this stuff, because I think it is important for people to be aware of. It's something that we're subject to every minute of the day. And so being aware of it is definitely half the battle. So I think we're going to come back with Atelston here in a few minutes. And once again, I have no idea what we're going to talk about. But thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
And wherever you're going, get there safe, and we'll be back in a few minutes with more of this guy. All righty, guys, take care. Bye.